They oftentimes say that it's not the destination that matters, but the journey itself. And if that's true, then I have to say, the Fight Night series has definitely been quite the journey. When I started reviewing these, I had only played one game in the series while it was current. This one. I went from not having a clue what the older games were like and found some of the most fun, unforgettable boxing titles that I've ever played in my entire life. But with every good thing, there has to be an ending somewhere. And, well, this is it. The very last Fight Night game. But not just that. Fight Night Champion is also the last ever made big budget boxing title. And I will say that until Undisputed proves me otherwise. Yeah. After this, the closest we got were EA's UFC games and maybe the odd indie title. So, let's see if Electronic Arts ended this series off with a bang, or if there's a very good reason why this was the last ever boxing game from a major publisher. Fight Night up to this point had actually sold pretty well. Not massive numbers in the tens of millions, but each title sold more than 1 million copies, with Round 3 being the best selling of the bunch. Round 4 didn't sell quite as much, but still respectable numbers that would impress any normal publisher. But the thing is, EA isn't a normal publisher. 1 million copies isn't good enough for them. Hell, 2 million is barely considered acceptable. Now, I did actually try to reach out to Cam Weber, the current CEO of EA Sports, who joined just as Champion was starting development, and tried to see if maybe he could shed some light on anything from sales numbers, budget, or maybe any interesting tidbits from the game's development. But I never got an answer, which I mean is fair. I didn't expect a response, but it still would have been cool to cap the series off with some actual official info. That all being said, part of the reason why Fight Night Champion was the last game in the franchise and the last major boxing video game ever released at the time of this video is likely due to the fact that licensing all of these boxers is an expensive endeavor. See, boxing isn't like MMA. It's a bunch of smaller organizations all owned by different companies, so licensing a boxer is a little different than, say, the WWE or UFC, where you have to sign over your likeness to be used in video games as part of the signing contract. The WWE owns John Cena, as does China, but Mike Tyson owns Mike Tyson. A lot also has to do with the time the game released. By 2011, development on the PS4 had started 3 years prior, and dev kits for that console went out probably in early 2012. It's safe to assume that with the upcoming new generation of consoles, as well as things like the rising costs of game development and maybe EA getting the rights to a certain organization from THQ, that it kind of makes sense for Fight Night to throw in the towel, at least for a little bit. That all being said, I didn't fucking expect it to take a 13-year-long hiatus. And I keep hearing people go, EA might announce one soon. No, they won't. Why? Because UFC is the new Fight Night. Like what, you think that supreme overlord of combat sports, Dana White, which is probably the prefix he would have if he were a Dark Souls boss, is going to just allow EA to make a combat sports game that isn't UFC? The idea this time around was presentation, because every game in the series amped things up in that field. Champion had to go out with a bang. It promised more violence, more brutality, and even went so far as to slap a big ol' M on the box, alongside... who the fuck is this? Yeah, I actually avoided trailers for Fight Night Champion prior to release, so I had no clue who this was. See, this is Andre Bishop on the cover, the protagonist of this game's cinematic story mode, which is like if instead of putting Sonic on the cover of Sonic Forces, they just put your OC. Yeah, that wouldn't look awkward, but the European version did have David Hay on the cover, so I guess it kind of balances out and somebody got their own little slice of the EA Sports curse. And yeah, you heard that correctly. Cinematic Story Mode. Actually, this is the first sports game to pull something like this off, and I really like this as an idea. Now, you might think that because I'm into boxing that I am a sports guy. I am not. I cannot for the life of me stand team sports. I tried to get into gridiron football as a teen, and I was fairly good at tennis late into high school, but to be brutally honest with you, the only thing more boring than watching soccer is playing soccer. But the idea of this story mode is to essentially be a boxing movie, sort of like playing out like a pretty good Rocky movie. Not Rocky 2 or 4, but Rocky 3. The one you watch, go, that was pretty good, and just move on with your day. To start with the narrative, the story mode sees you playing as up-and-coming boxing star Andre Bishop, who, after rejecting a corrupt fight promoter, sees himself fighting for his life in prison and then fighting for a chance at redemption after being let out. Andre Bishop is a fairly standard protagonist. He isn't unlikable, but there also isn't really anything noteworthy about his personality. Do I think this hurts the game at all? No, not really. Andre is just likable enough to want to see him pull through, but doesn't really have enough personality to stand out. I don't feel for him the same way I do someone like Rocky Balboa, because we don't really get to know Andre outside of just boxing. But what does make this story enjoyable is the villains. Now, I am one of those people who doesn't really like villains that much. I will never understand why people prefer the Joker to Batman, since the Joker is meant to be an irredeemable monster and we're supposed to want to see him stopped. But the villains in Fight Night Champion are so disgustingly hateable that I kind of just fall in love with them. You can't help but want to bring them down a peg, and that's what I feel helps attach me to Andre's story. I don't care so much about Andre, but Isaac Frost? Yeah. No, that is a man I want to break. Sure hope nobody takes me out of context with that phrase. Isaac Frost is one part Ivan Drago and one part Dick Dastardly, with the voice of Roy Mustang from Fullmetal Alchemist. No, really, that's Travis Willingham. Guy just has a habit of playing dudes that can light you up with straight hands.
This is called boxing. Let me do this. Listen, I'm not gonna cry every time some clown gets hurt, right? Raymond Bishop knew the risks when he stepped into the ring with me. Maybe if he ever wakes up, I'll knock some sense into his stupid ass.
I can't help but think that when he's not boxing, he's pulling the wings off of honeybees with one hand and twirling his mustache with the other. I imagine that when he's scheduling his fights, he has to make sure not to double book it for the same day he has to kick a box of orphaned puppies down an elevator shaft. This man is such a cartoonishly evil, over-the-top prick that Dick Dastardly would tell him to dial shit back. The other villain is a fight promoter named D.L. McQueen, who I imagine is the guy who supplies Isaac Frost with the honeybees for him to pull the wings off of. D.L. McQueen is your typical spoiled brat of a fight promoter, drawing heavy inspiration from real-life boxing supervillain Don King. Oh fuck, now I get it. Don King, D.L. McQueen, okay, it makes sense. Thankfully, Andre has his own team, consisting of Gus Carisi, a former boxer and the trainer of both Andre and his late father, who has a slight resemblance to both Mickey from the Rocky movies, as well as legendary boxing coach Cus D'Amato. He's also promoted by Megan McQueen, DL's rebellious daughter, who has the hots for Andre, and like Andre, she doesn't really have a lot of personality outside of just being kinda spunky. After a fight, Andre returns to his gym where he's assaulted by a pair of corrupt cops in DL's pocket, and after a brief struggle is arrested and convicted of assaulting a police officer. Okay, now, here is where we get into a touchy subject, and I am not sure if I'm the right person to talk about it. I'm not sure if you've noticed this, and okay. You all might want to make sure you're sitting down. This will come to you all as a bit of a shock, but it had to come out eventually. I am not black. I know, it's a huge shock. It took me a while to come to terms with it. I didn't want to believe it at first myself, but, them's the breaks. And honestly, that's why I feel this narrative does kind of work. Andre did actually commit a crime. The game doesn't outright state that Andre is a victim of systemic racism, which, good for it, because that's very low-hanging fruit. But the game does tackle the concept of racism, and somehow, all without ever using the gamer word. Yes, there is not a single time when you're fighting one of the skinheads that they go for the word that got PewDiePie banned. Once in prison, Andre must defend himself against a series of attacks from a bunch of skinheads, and it's here where the game starts to show off some of the variety via bare-knuckle boxing. The leader of these assholes breaks Andre's hand, but you do eventually get to take revenge on them one by one. This could have gone from Rocky Balboa to American History X real damn fucking fast with him walking into the bathroom like that. I half expected it. After being let out, the story turns into a tale of redemption as Andre, now a heavyweight, climbs back up the ranks until his brother, who, okay, ironically, they make a huge plot point out of his brother Raymond trying to escape Andre's shadow, but they probably would have made a stronger point if he wasn't in, 4% of the entire game. His whole purpose in the plot is to get fucked up by Knuckles the Echidna right before the final fight. That is the only purpose that Raymond actually serves, is to just get the shit kicked out of him. Towards the end, Megan records her dad with evidence that he set up Andre the Bomb, and Andre having a massive final battle with Isaac Frost, avenging his brother, taking down DL McQueen. Now, my major issue with story modes in a lot of fighting games is that they do not teach you how to play the game. As much of a guilty pleasure as I find NRS's games like Injustice 2 or Mortal Kombat X, those are essentially just big dumb popcorn flicks, with a fighting game that just so happens to be duct taped to them. And while I don't think there's anything wrong with that necessarily, they tend to assume you already know how to play the game at a semi-competent level, or at least competently enough to get to the next cutscene. What Fight Night Champions story mode does is use the story as a way to throw the player into new situations they might face during actual gameplay. For example, know how I mentioned that Andre's hand got broken in prison? Well, that actually comes back later on, and is used to teach the player how to act when half of their arsenal is practically cut off from them. Later on, you have a fight where Andre gets cut open mid-fight, and then you have to spend that entire fight protecting a cut that won't stop bleeding, teaching the player how to properly defend and evade. What this mode actually does is attempt to teach the player a lot of the finer intricacies of Fight Night and how to box smart. And boxing really is a thinking man's sport. Yes, brute force does have a place in it, but boxing is referred to as the sweet science for a reason. If it wasn't mentally demanding, everyone would be doing it. And this mode forces the player into situations where having the hardest punch isn't always the answer. Overall, this story mode is both a serviceable narrative as well as an actual teaching tool for people who had never played a Fight Night game before. Or maybe they're just getting back into it. Either way, this mode does a lot to get you up to speed. And it all culminates into a final encounter with Isaac Frost, who requires the player to put together everything they've learned throughout the story thus far to come out on top. And it's hard as fuck, okay? Even on normal difficulty. Like, when Mike Tyson gets to the end of Mike Tyson's Punch-Out, I'm willing to bet that Isaac Frost is his final boss. Which also leads me into something that a lot of people have complained to me about. The controls. Replacing the total punch control system of the last 4 games is Champion's new full spectrum punch controls. And as someone who is definitely on a spectrum, I love these controls. What the FSPC does is make it so that instead of having to do input motions with the right stick, different punches are performed with simple flicks of the right stick. This gives you access to new types of punches like flared jabs and straights, overhands, hooker cuts, etc., which previously were not available, opening up different angles of attack. While a lot of people I've spoken to have called this dumbed down, I don't agree. Yeah, see, there's this thing called depth with fighting games, and before someone comes in saying that Fight Night isn't a fighting game, it's in the name. It still has to abide by the same sort of rules as something like Street Fighter or Tekken, even if it's a different kind of fighting game. Now, with depth, there are two kinds of depth. For example, something like Tekken, a 4-button fighter, where each button corresponds with a specific limb, has what I call technical depth. It requires more muscle memory than knowledge checks. And don't get me wrong, it definitely does require knowledge checks, but muscle memory plays a lot more. It's technically impressive to see played at a high level, but it doesn't come across as particularly strategic. You're not really using your brain, you're just using muscle memory and reflexes to memorize the combo strings. I swear this is fucking going somewhere, okay? Like, just bear with me for 5 minutes. Compare that to Smash Bros., which is a 2-button fighter, which, on the surface, sounds far simpler than Tekken. But then we now have a Tekken character in Smash, which means we can have direct comparisons. And Kazuya's move list has definitely been cut down a far bit from his appearances in Tekken, but Smash Bros. Is a game about what I like to refer as strategic depth. Now, in Smash, Kazuya has access to a lot of his moves at the press of a few buttons, much less than what it is required in Tekken. But sometimes, it's just not the time to use a certain move. With Smash being a game heavily focused on spacing and mobility, a lot of the things that worked really well in Tekken now aren't quite as useful. Whereas things that weren't super useful in Tekken have much greater purpose when in the more limited context of Smash. And I feel that's the same case here. The controls in Fight Night Champion have been simplified, but as a result, the game itself feels far more strategic. I feel like my actions during the fight actually matter, and while things like doctor stoppages definitely happened in past games, they felt random. I feel like aiming for cuts or swelling is a legitimate strategy in Champion. And this is all helped by another first for the series, a head movement system that not only functions, but feels legitimately good to use. I have confidence in how my boxer avoids punches now, and dodging, weaving, bobbing under incoming shots now feels like it actually serves some sort of purpose besides just being something for the left trigger to do. Another complaint I've heard people say about this game is that it's too fast, that it's more like watching Dragon Ball Z than an actual boxing match. And, okay, I'm sorry, have you ever watched boxing? Boxing isn't slow. Boxing is fast as fuck, boy. Here's a clip. Man, that was a solid cross right there, holy shit. The power, the skill behind it. Most men would give their left nut for a punch like that. But, did you see that hook that he landed that knocked his opponent down?
You know, you talk about guys comfortable.
Boxing is fast and brutal, and that is 100% on display in Champion. Not only do we have some of the fastest gameplay in the series, we also have a more accurate representation of its brutality. Now, I know a lot of people try to downplay the violence in the sport so as to not seem like bloodthirsty maniacs, but the fact of the matter is, you will absolutely get fucked up in boxing. But then what about the modes? Fight Night Champion is probably the most robust when it comes to any game in the entire series. Mostly because, well, after 13 years, this is the only Fight Night that you can still play online. To dig into the modes themselves, we'll kick off with Career Mode. This is the best fucking career mode in any game yet. All of the customization options from 4 return, and while you don't have to micromanage things like your schedule all too much, it's vastly improved by just being much faster, smoother, and snappier. Also, yes, I did make Little Mac. I figured why the hell not? He isn't perfect, but he also has the advantage of not being that eldritch horror that EA put into the GameCube version of Round 2. The biggest improvement to the career mode has to be how it handles the training minigames. Now, while they aren't great, they are mercifully short, load fairly quickly, and actually serve a purpose besides just padding out the game. All of your attributes are now tied with your skills. All of your different punches, head movement, blocking, footwork, they all level up independently, and you gain experience to improve them from winning fights and doing the training minigames. Of course, this was also the start of the dark age of video games, and EA knew that the best way to the top in the fight game was obvious. See, sometimes it isn't enough to have skill or hit hard or move fast or deliver a quality product. No, sometimes you just gotta grease a few wheels. Yeah, you can just buy experience. Like, with money. With real, actual money. Like, from your bank account. Your actual bank account. Now, on one hand, I think this is scummy. I mean, what kind of idiot would pay real-world money to get a slight boost in an offline single-player mode? You'd have to be absolutely retarded. Me. I did. I am that idiot. Why did I do it? To see what would happen. And on the other hand, it is convenient. Now, EA also gave us the ability to unlock these experience boosts through normal gameplay, so it's not like Scrooge McDuck would have an advantage over anyone else, he would just have it sooner. Again, not really a fan of this, but it is what it is, and at least you can unlock these boosts by just playing the game normally. I sure do hope EA keeps that with the UFC games. Sure would be awkward as fuck if they made it so you unlocked some things by playing the game you were already going to play, but then arbitrarily hid other things behind microtransactions. With how fast this career mode moves along, I actually found myself still going even after getting the title from Tyson. I went to the point where I had 3 belts and did something I hadn't done for any of my other Fight Night reviews, which is actually finish the career mode. Now, before I get to the end of my career run, I just want to point out a couple issues I have with this mode, and I've been saving them for this occasion. The first one is the stupidly low level cap. See, you can only accumulate 220 skill points, and you can't redistribute them later on. You are committed to where you put your experience. The issue is, the game absolutely still expects you to be doing the training minigames, and while those are much better than in the past games, by the time your career is over, you will be sitting on a literal metric fuckton of experience that you cannot do anything with. And 220? That is such a random number. 250, I'd get. Hell, I'd even understand if it was 200. But 220? That's the cap? Imagine playing something like Final Fantasy VII, and your level cap was just some weird number, like 83. The other issue I have is money. There really isn't any purpose for it. Yeah, your gym costs money, so early on, if you want to make the scene, you gotta have the green. But it gets to the point where your boxer is practically wiping other people's asses with Benjamins. I had 12 goddamn $1 million at the end. Now, I am fairly sure you can use this money on things like ring gear, but it didn't really mean anything to me. By the end, I ran into the same issue that plagues every single one of these games, and it's that after a point, you're just going to be fighting the same 4 or 5 guys until you decide to retire. Which, I mean, there's really only so many times you can fight Jack Dempsey before it gets old. But for my last match in career mode, I decided to face the ultimate challenge. Since I made Little Mac, I figured that the only fitting way to end this run was to crank the difficulty all the way up and fight Iron Mike one last time. And, honestly, I thought he'd be tougher. He was hard, yeah, and any mistakes could have cost me the fight, but after a few rounds of actually boxing and not just mashing buttons, I managed to come out on top, putting Kid Dynamite down for the count in the 4th round, and ending my career as the greatest of all time. Honestly, this is probably my favorite career mode in any combat sports game. Yeah, it's still bogged down by shit like the training minigames, but they aren't as bad as they were before, and they're over pretty quickly. But what other modes are on offer here?
This is the best mode in any boxing game. Don't even argue with me, okay? Bare fucking knuckle. Or as they call it in Japan, Streets of Rage. Yes, it wasn't just a thing they put into the story mode. You can now box without gloves, and it is fucking glorious. This is where the game really earns its mature rating, because fights turn into a goddamn Tarantino film by the middle of the first round. It's so satisfying to land punches in this mode as they feel a lot, punchier, for a lack of a better term. Usually you or your opponent will turn into a goddamn 1980s anime OVA by the second round, and it's some baller ass shit. Turn on old school rules for some added fun, although I kinda do wish they had some old timey arenas or like a black and white filter to go along with it.
Now I've kept the review mostly positive because I do really like this game. It's probably my favorite of the bunch, but I do have some small grievances with it, and this is the only place I could think of in the review to put them.
Something I wasn't a fan of in past games is the camera options. There's a solid amount here, but like Fight Night 2004, there's some that are just much better than others. I love the champion camera angle, but play with the camera set to broadcast and you'll find out why maybe leaving the ref out of the ring for the later UFC games was the right call. It did, however, let me recreate angles from Punch-Out, so it's not all bad. My other issue is with the damage. I said earlier that the fighters get 50 shades of fucked right up in bare knuckle mode, but that's just in bare knuckle mode. In normal gameplay, your boxer will still look ready for his photo shoot unless you take a shit ton of damage and go all 12 rounds. I mean, it is realistic to have the amount of damage that bare knuckle mode provides, but I'd also like to fuck people up in normal gameplay since you can't use certain fighters in bare knuckle mode. Because I guess Mike Tyson doesn't want to seem like some sort of violent person.
Online has been a part of this series since round 2, and I've always wanted to experience this game with other people, so why not? How's the online?
Well, in one word, terrible. In 2 words, fucking terrible. And it's not really the game's fault. The issue is that this game is designed around using the right stick for punching, but it also gives the option for button controls. One is a hell of a lot faster than the other, so you'll be trying to box, looking for angles, trying to actually, box, and your opponent will come in and spam body shots because buttons don't have to take into account things like travel time. Now, I see nothing wrong with offering buttons as a control scheme. In fact, I would be annoyed if they weren't there. But I also do feel that I should be able to filter out players that use them. I feel like I should have the option of if I want to play against people who are exclusively using the right stick, and it's at this point where I kind of started to understand why round 4 didn't have the option to use both at the same time. See, round 4 when it launched didn't have button punching controls whatsoever. They were added in a later patch. The idea with round 4 was to stick to its gimmick, and to a degree, I kind of wish Champion did that. I know it sounds odd considering I shout on round 4 during its review, but I have to admire it for sticking to its guns. Now, this doesn't hurt the rest of the game, which is fucking fantastic, but it does kind of bring what I initially expected to be a fun, enjoyable online experience right the fuck down. And it's not even a I didn't learn the mechanics kind of thing, because Fight Night Champion is designed around its right stick controls.
But that's not even mentioning the actual worst part about playing this game online with other players, which is playing this game online with other players.
Everyone you fight online will be one of 3 kinds of players. Guys that spam body hooks with high-ranked fighters, guys that won't shut the fuck up on the microphone, or worst of all, people that will not let you finish the fight when they're losing. Look, I get that every single game has bad apples, and nobody likes losing, but man, just take the fucking L. I have such an issue with rage quitting that I almost never do it. Yeah, there's definitely times where I'll leave a match, like, it happens. For one reason or another, it's going to happen at least once or twice. But generally, I try to make sure that I see the fight through to the end, win or lose. Rage quitting doesn't help you. In fact, it actually hurts the game. This game keeps track of it, alerting other players to the fact that you're a little bitch that can't stomach losing. Look, this is a 2-player game. You have a 50% chance of losing. You're going to see that get-up minigame several times. You might as well just finish the match and move on. You have 24 hours in your day. Don't let losing a game ruin the rest of it. And honestly, it's kind of why I find this game hard to recommend if you want to play against people online. It's not the worst experience, but it's not a good one. The game does shine through with the amount of modes like a ranked championship, online gyms, and even bare knuckle online, but to be brutally honest, it's the offline offerings that make this game great. But then you pair that with the story that serves as a functional, actually well thought out tutorial, controls that are simple to use paired with the gameplay that still offers a fair amount of strategic and technical depth, and the whole host of customization options, you can see why Fight Night Champion is not just the best game in the series, but one of the best boxing games ever made.
But there is one more issue I have with the game. You knew it was coming, folks. Ladies and gentlemen, the online pass.
With this game actually being backwards compatible on the current Xbox consoles as well as through EA Play on the PS4 and 5, you'd think all of the DLC would be available. But it's not. Things like the EXP boosts cannot be purchased on modern consoles or the 360 due to the 360 store just not being around anymore. It went out for milk. And this game also has the online pass bullshit before had, but if you bought it digitally or playing it through Xbox Game Pass, you don't have to worry about it all that much. It's only if you buy a physical copy nowadays that you do. And like Round 4, a lot of the content is stuck behind that pass. Bare knuckle mode, and I'm pretty sure even legacy mode this time around, though I'm not too sure about that now that I think about it, so don't quote me on that. The online modes are definitely locked behind it, and that does include the Boxer Share, a feature that allows you to share your pugilistic creations with other players so that you don't have to make Jake Paul yourself to have Prime Mike Tyson give him what he fucking deserves.
And at this point, I am kind of running out of things to say about Fight Night Champion, positive or negative. If you haven't played it, I highly recommend it. Get some friends together on a Saturday night, a case of beer, and you're in for some damn good times. The online, though, is a bit of a sticking point, as the community is, the community's fucking rough, okay? I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. But if you can find a select online group of friends to play this with, it shouldn't be much different than playing locally.
But now I ask the question, should this have been the heat death of the franchise? Yeah, actually. I can't think of any way to actually build or improve this game. It's so close to perfect that I feel building on it in ways outside of expanding the roster would just be impossible. And if they were to make a new Fight Night that was just this with more boxers, everyone would call it lazy. This is EA Sports flying as close to the sun as they possibly can without melting their wax wings. And I genuinely feel that they might not be able to top it. So I would rather the franchise go out on top than get a lackluster sequel. And I feel this way about many other franchises. If Mega Man X4 was the last in its series, I would have been happy. No X6, no X7, even if it means missing out on actual good games in the series like Command Mission or X8. I'm okay with that. I would absolutely give up Final Fantasy X if it meant that 8 and 9 also got to just fuck right off and the series ended at 6. Sometimes, it's okay to have a series end. It hurts,
but sometimes you have to retire while you're still at the top. Because if you don't, you end up having to fight former Disney child actors to make your alimony payments. It's like if Leonard Spinks had to fight Macaulay Culkin.